Welcome to your Health Facts podcast. Today we're going to be talking about vitamin B1. You might know it as thiamine,
Right, thiamine.
and we're going to be talking about how important it is, but how it's often overlooked.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is overlooked. A lot of people don't even know it's important.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize how many common foods are actually low in B1,
That's true.
and so we're going to get into all that.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is you can have a lot of symptoms that you might not think are related to a vitamin deficiency, but actually are like if you're feeling tired
Right.
or you have tingling in your hands and feet, even things like anxiety.
Really?
Yeah, all of those things can actually be linked back to a B1 deficiency.
Huh. So it's really like it's kind of like the spark plug for your nervous system.
Exactly. It's like the spark plug.
Yeah.
It helps your body convert food into energy.
Right.
And without enough of it, things start to misfire, you know?
Okay, so I'm curious. One of the things that I've read about thiamine is the connection to white rice.
Oh, yeah. That's a fascinating story.
Yeah, tell me more about that.
So back in the late 19th century, there was this disease called beriberi.
Beriberi.
Yeah, and it was really common in Java.
Huh.
And this Dutch scientist was studying it, and he noticed that chickens were also getting sick with beriberi.
Oh, wow. So it wasn't just humans.
No, it wasn't. And what he found was that the chickens who were eating brown rice, they didn't get sick.
Oh,
But the ones who were eating white rice, they did. And it turned out that brown rice contains this factor that prevents the disease.
interesting.
And that factor later became known as thiamine or vitamin B1.
So essentially, it's like the refining process, the way that they make white rice,
Exactly.
strips away
Strips away the nutrients.
all the good stuff.
All the good stuff. The B vitamins and all that are gone.
So it's not just rice then, I'm assuming.
No, not at all.
It's white bread and
White bread pasta, anything that's refined like that.
gotcha. Okay. So another thing I've heard about with thiamine deficiency is alcohol consumption.
Yes, alcohol is a big one.
Okay, why is that?
Well, for a couple of reasons, actually. First of all, alcohol interferes with the absorption of thiamine. So even if you are eating foods with thiamine, if you're drinking a lot of alcohol, you're not going to be able to absorb it properly.
Okay.
And then on top of that, alcohol actually increases the elimination of thiamine from your body.
So it's like a double whammy.
It is, yeah. You're kind of getting hit from both sides there.
And so I would imagine then that if you're somebody who has a diet that's very heavy on processed foods and also drinking a lot of alcohol, that's like a recipe for disaster.
It really is, yeah. You're setting yourself up for a deficiency for sure.
Okay. What about other health conditions? Are there any other health conditions that can kind of increase the risk of thiamine deficiency?
Yeah, there are actually a few. So, for example, people with diabetes, they tend to excrete more thiamine in their urine.
Okay.
So they have lower levels in their body. And then also, if you're taking diuretics,
Like water pills.
exactly, those can also increase thiamine excretion. And then people who are on dialysis, they're also at a higher risk because dialysis removes thiamine from the blood.
So there's a lot of different things that can actually impact your thiamine levels.
There are, yeah. It's not just about what you're eating, it's also about other factors going on in your body.
Okay. So we've talked about some of the causes of thiamine deficiency, but what happens if you are deficient? Like, what are some of the symptoms?
Well, the symptoms can be pretty varied, which is why it's sometimes hard to diagnose.
Okay.
You might just feel tired and irritable, you know?
Yeah, I definitely feel that sometimes.
Or you might have nerve pain and tingling.
Right.
Or you might have trouble concentrating.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And even things like anxiety and depression can be linked to thiamine deficiency.
Huh. So it really impacts like your whole body.
It does, yeah. It affects
Ugh.
your physical health and your mental health.
Wow. And I've even heard that in some cases, thiamine deficiency can lead to some pretty serious consequences, like beriberi.
Yes. Beriberi is a very serious condition that can affect your nervous system, your heart, and even your brain.
Wow. Okay. So what exactly is beriberi?
Well, there are actually two main types of beriberi. There's dry beriberi and wet beriberi.
Oh, I didn't realize there were two types.
Yeah, so dry beriberi mainly affects the nervous system, so you'll have symptoms like tingling, burning sensations, leg cramps, muscle weakness, things like that.
So it's kind of like what we were talking about before with the nerve pain.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of an amplified version of that. And then wet beriberi affects the cardiovascular system, so you might have fluid retention heart problems, and it can even be fatal.
Oh, wow. So that's really serious.
It is, yeah. It's definitely something you don't want to mess with.
Okay. So those are some of the more serious consequences.
Hmm.
But what about the early signs of thiamine deficiency? Like, what should people be looking out for?
Well, the early symptoms can be pretty subtle.
Okay.
Like you might just be a little bit more irritable than usual,
Hmm.
or you might not have as much of an appetite, and you might even have some minor memory lapses.
Oh, really?
Yeah, those are all things that could be early signs of a thiamine deficiency.
So it's important to kind of pay attention to those subtle changes in your body.
Exactly, because if you catch it early, you can prevent it from becoming something more serious.
Okay. Um, so we've talked about the causes and the symptoms of thiamine deficiency, but in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to get into what you can do to prevent it.
Sounds good.
We'll be right back after a short break.
And, another common symptom is nerve pain, or what we call neuropathy.
Okay.
And that can feel like a really sharp shooting pain, like in your arms and legs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's because the nerves aren't getting the energy they need from the thiamine.
I see.
And sometimes you can even have tremors like shaking in your hands or other body part.
Really?
Yeah, it can be pretty scary if you don't know what's going on.
So it really affects your whole nervous system.
It does, yeah, and it can also affect your mood, too.
Oh,
Well, thiamine is really important for the production of neurotransmitters.
like serotonin and dopamine.
Exactly, those are the feel-good chemicals in your brain.
Right.
And when you don't have enough thiamine, your brain can't make enough of those neurotransmitters.
So that's why you might be feeling more irritable or anxious or even depressed.
Yeah, exactly. It's all connected.
Wow. I'm also curious about how thiamine deficiency affects cognitive function.
Oh, yeah, that's another big one.
Like, what are some of the ways that it can impact your thinking?
Well, you might have trouble concentrating
Oh,
or staying focused on tasks.
right.
And you might just feel kind of foggy-headed in general.
Hmm?
And it can also affect your sleep.
Really?
Yeah, a lot of people with thiamine deficiency have trouble falling asleep or staying asleep.
I can see how that would be a problem.
Yeah, it can make it hard to function during the day if you're not getting enough rest.
That makes sense.
Sure.
And I've also heard that thiamine deficiency can be linked to restless leg syndrome.
Oh, yeah, that's another interesting connection.
So what's the relationship there?
Well, it's thought that restless leg syndrome might be caused by a buildup of lactic acid in the muscles.
Okay.
And when you're deficient in thiamine, your body can't process lactic acid as efficiently.
So it kind of builds up.
Yeah, and that can lead to that uncomfortable feeling in your legs that makes you want to move them all the time.
Wow, this sounds really frustrating.
It is, yeah. It can be hard to get a good night's sleep if you have restless leg syndrome.
Right. So we've been talking a lot about how thiamine deficiency affects your nerves and your brain, but can it also impact your senses?
It can, yeah. You can have sensory disturbances, like a burning sensation in your feet and hands,
Mm-hmm.
or numbness and tingling.
And is that also because of the nerve damage?
Exactly. It's all related to the nerves not getting enough energy.
Gotcha. Okay. And then I know that in severe cases, thiamine deficiency can lead to beriberi.
Right. Beriberi is a very serious condition that can affect multiple organ systems.
Okay. And we talked about the two types of beriberi, dry and wet.
Yeah, so just to recap, dry beriberi mainly affects the nervous system.
Okay.
So you'll have those symptoms like tingling, burning leg cramps, muscle weakness.
And then wet beriberi affects the heart and the circulatory system.
Exactly. And with wet beriberi, you can have fluid build up in the legs and lungs.
So it can lead to heart failure.
It can, yeah, and it can also cause really low blood pressure, which can be life-threatening.
Oh, wow. So that's really serious.
It is, yeah. Beriberi is not something to take lightly.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground here, but how do doctors actually diagnose thiamine deficiency?
Well, it can be a little bit tricky because there's not a single test that can definitively diagnose it.
Oh, okay.
So doctors usually use a combination of things like a physical exam,
Right.
looking for those telltale signs, and then they might also do some blood tests.
Did you take your thiamine levels?
Yeah, they can check the levels of thiamine directly, but sometimes that's not the most reliable method.
So what do they do instead?
Well, there's an enzyme called transketolase.
Transketat?
Yeah, it's a mouthful, but basically this enzyme needs thiamine to work properly.
Right.
So if your transketolase activity is low, it's a pretty good indication that you're deficient in thiamine.
So it's kind of an indirect way of measuring your thiamine status.
Exactly.
Okay. So once you've been diagnosed with thiamine deficiency, what's the treatment?
Well, the good news is that thiamine deficiency is usually pretty easy to treat.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah, it typically involves taking thiamine supplements.
Okay,
And those can be either oral supplements or injections, depending on how severe the deficiency is.
gotcha.
And in most cases, the symptoms will start to improve pretty quickly once you start taking
Oh,
supplements.
that's encouraging.
It is, yeah, but it's important to remember that even after you've recovered, you still need to make sure you're getting enough thiamine in your diet.
To prevent it from coming back.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so in the next part of our deep dive, we'll talk about some of the best food sources of thiamine and some tips for making sure you're getting enough of this essential nutrient in your diet.
Sounds good. And it's especially important for pregnant women and breastfeeding mothers to make sure they're getting enough thiamine.
Right, because they're providing nutrients for their babies.
Exactly. And also people with certain health conditions like diabetes.
They need to be more mindful of their thiamine intake.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about food sources. What are some of the best foods to eat if you want to make sure you're getting enough thiamine?
Well, there are a lot of good options out there.
Right.
Some of the top sources include meats like pork and beef,
Okay.
and then whole grains like brown rice and
So
oats.
those are good sources of fiber too.
They are, yeah. And then legumes like beans and lentils.
Those are great plant-based protein sources.
Yep. And then you've also got nuts and seeds and green veggies.
Okay, so there's really a wide variety of foods to choose from.
There is, yeah. And another good source is brewer's yeast.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's got a kind of a nutty flavor.
Okay.
You can add it to smoothies or sprinkle it on food.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it sounds like eating a balanced diet with plenty of whole foods is really the key to getting enough thiamine.
It really is. Yeah. And it's also important to be mindful of things that can deplete thiamine levels.
Right, like alcohol.
Exactly. So if you do drink alcohol, just try to do it in moderation.
And what about tea and coffee?
Well, those also contain enzymes that can break down thiamine.
Okay.
So again, just try to consume those in moderation.
So moderation is key.
It is. Yeah. It's all about balance.
Well, this has been really fascinating. I've learned so much about thiamine today.
Me too. It's always good to revisit the basics.
And I think it's so important for people to be aware of this nutrient because it really does play such a vital role in our health.
It does. Yeah. And it's easy to overlook.
Right. But hopefully after listening to this episode, people will be more mindful of their thiamine intake.
That's the goal.
And if you're interested in learning more about taking care of your health, be sure to subscribe to yourhealthfacts.com.
Yes, lots of great information there.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.